Looks like we're live. What's happening, everybody? Hope everybody's having a fantastic whatever day you're watching this. So today's the big day. If you're a motorcycle fan, and more importantly, if you are a sports bike fan, primarily the new super sport class, today's a huge opportunity for you because you've got the Yamaha R9 that was recently unveiled. Now, for those of you guys that might not be in the know, the Yamaha R9 is taking the place of the R6 as Yamaha's middleweight super sport offering. And because of that, well, it's got some pretty big shoes to fill. And I think that a motorcycle like the R6, God, what more can you say about that bike? I mean, in terms of being the king of the hill of the 600 class, I know that in my experience, I don't know of many bikes that are miles better. You know, all of them are really good, but I think the reality is that you've got quite a few machines that are hovering around out there that on any given day are going to be potent, but the R6 is always going to be a podium finish, and I mean top podium finish no matter what. And that is the expectation I think that a lot of folks have had for this R9. That world-beating type of a performance. There's a lot of folks that were looking at that motorcycle that had, well, they had a certain level of expectations. And I think that since this bike has been released, there's been some of those expectations that have been well-founded. And I also feel like, though, there's going to be a lot of folks that might end up being a little bit disappointed by what the tech sheet has to say. Now, I am never one to judge a motorcycle specifically by its specification sheet. It doesn't, number one, it doesn't speak to the actual character of the bike, and that's really what matters, is how the thing feels to ride. So if that CP3 engine is anything to, or has anything to say about it, it's going to be one of the most fun motorcycles that may have been released in recent memory. The CP3 is very torquey. As a matter of fact, that 900cc triple feels like a significantly larger engine, up to about 80% of the way through its RPM range. Because of that, it's much loved by pretty much everybody that's ridden a bike powered by that thing, and this motorcycle is not going to be any different. Now, in talking about the actual layout of the bike, it's got a little bit different frame body cycle. They did change some things with the frame, and those changes are bespoke to the R9. But with that being said, again, the CP3 is unchanged. Tons of rider aids, which is great, but I can tell you this, I'm super excited. I cannot wait to ride one of these things. I have a feeling it's going to be a better version of my Triumph T595. That's really what I'm looking for this bike to be for me. Let me check in with you guys real quick. We got Dan just now checking in first in. Just saw the article. I'm super excited for it. Same, very much so. Oh, and before I dig any deeper on this, I did post up a video about the bike. I need to do some housekeeping. I butchered up the pricing in that video. My bad. One of the initial reports that I had read was that motorcycle was going to sell for 12,500 British sterling, which would have landed it somewhere around $16,000. So that's not the price. It's $12,500 US American currency. Lime is in. How's it going, Motorcycle Mason? What's up, Lime? Good seeing you in the chat, bro. It's going great. So check this out. Here's where I'm at with this bike. I know there's a lot of folks of a certain age, right, that when they hear 900cc motorcycle, you immediately reflex to CBR 900, the 954, really any of the Daytona 955s, the 929, any of the old school 900s. That was the hyperclass of bikes. And now that you've got a little bit more of, time has passed. And folks really aren't looking for hyper-class motorcycles per se. What they're looking for is more of a sports bike, a street sports bike. And I think that's really where the R9 is going to do well. And the reason why I say that is this. The CP3 engine, number one. Number two, I like that this motorcycle has the full complement of rider aids that the R1 has. In that it's got a 6-axis IMU, it's got various ride modes, it has customizable modes. Heck, this thing even has launch control. So there's a lot going on with this bike that it really doesn't need to have. But I think that it's cool that it does have the doodads and gadgets to go along with it. The reason why I say that is because it makes the motorcycle safer. Where I see this bike doing really well is with returning motorcycle riders. Somebody that wants something that's torquey, and keep in mind, that's exactly what that CP3 is. Very torquey, very rich in its power development. It gives a ton of throttle response, a lot of power under the curve on the throttle, so to speak. And I don't just mean that earlier on in the power band. What I mean by that is it gives you a lot of torque response at partial throttle. Again, it feels like a larger engine than it actually is. And because of that characteristic, guys that might be getting back into motorcycles that are still sports bike riders at heart, but don't really see themselves ever going to the track again, or don't see themselves trying to feather a tire every time they take the motorcycle out to their favorite country roads or the canyons, this might be an ideal motorcycle for you. And since it's going to check in at $12,000-ish, and it's going to be about the same price as all the rest of the 600s that you might have been taking a look at anyway, it's got the torque, it's got the character. Never mind that it doesn't have the horsepower, but it's got everything else that you might need. An aggressive riding position, but not so aggressive to be confused with hyper sports type geometry. This is where that motorcycle could potentially do really well. Ryan is in saying, "What's up, Professor?" What's up, Ryan? So in saying all of that, what could we realistically hope for this bike? Well, for the folks that are into motorcycles, they're looking at this bike as more of a it's a graduate, it's a way to graduate up in motorcycles without having to suffer the trappings of a 14 or 15,000 RPM hypersport motorcycle. It gives you a sport bike experience, and really in some ways, you have to give me a little bit of latitude on this, but you get some old school muscly bike type torque with this thing. I don't want to say hyper sports, but you get some of the performance that you could maybe hope to get, again, at partial throttle under the curve, so to speak, of a leader bike. Again, without the trappings of the excess of horsepower that can be overwhelming. It can be very distracting, and it can basically act as to set the tone for the bike. Like the horsepower number is the only thing that defines the motorcycle, which what ends up happening with leader class bikes. Let's be honest. Leader class bikes now are all 200-ish horsepower. 190 to 210 horsepower is like, that's just the cover charge to get into leader class territory these days. Long gone are the days where 140, 150, 160 horsepower get it done in leader class land, at least not with a full fairing anyway. But in this case, if you're starting off, and let's say you've been fortunate enough to get your hands on, say, a Ninja 400 or a CBR 650, maybe even a Daytona 660, and you've had an opportunity to run that bike around for a while and it's time to graduate up, this is the equivalent of those motorcycles. In essence, as weird as it's going to sound for me to say this, it is the equivalent of an A2 motorcycle just grown up. It's a 50% more, if you will, at least in terms of torque, power-wise, I suppose. It's but 15 to 20% more horsepower than all the rest of the field when it comes to those what we would consider to be A2 or A2 tunable bikes from Triumph, Honda. The R7 falls into this as well, which are great motorcycles, don't get me wrong, but the reality is that when you're looking at the R9 and what is soon to be the RCR from KTM, let's not forget about that bike. you've got two that are entering into the world at about the same time. The RCR has a parallel twin. It's using the RC8, the 954cc parallel twin. It's called the 990. It's really 954, 950 something. I can't remember the exact number. Anyway, 128 horsepower out of that contraption. So a little bit more horsepower, but you kind of get the idea. All these motorcycles are going to be roughly in the same family of power and primarily the same family of torque production, which is what they're going to be sold on primarily. So you can almost, I don't know, I don't want to say it's an irrelevant statistic. Horsepower does always matter, but when it comes to the richness of the riding experience and really what that motorcycle is intended for, and how it fits into a stair step of motorcycle ownership and progression, it's tough to fault and it's tough to argue that it's a bad business model and that it's a bad waterfall, if you will, or stair step, however you look at it, going up or coming down. And again, where I see this bike doing exceptionally well is in returning motorcyclists. Guys that, again, they want a sport bike, but they don't want to be suffered through the hyper sports class of motorcycle. They don't like the hyper sports riding position. They don't want any of that. They want something that's sporting, but again, it's not, you don't have to really wring its neck to get the most out of it. And they don't want to mess with the expense of a leader bike too. Keep in mind, this is a big part of this. Leader class motorcycles now are at a minimum $16,000 to $17,000. 18 to 19 will get you a really nice version of one of the Apex Predators from any of the manufacturers that are out there, save for maybe BMW, some other more lofty brands. But the reality is that that $12,000 to $13,000, maybe $11,000 to $14,000 range, that's where guys are buying bikes. At least they were. And when the hyper class went away, now is when those not so super sports grow up and evolve into R9s and RCRs. But let me check back in with you guys real quick. Southern Indiana saying, I've got an MT-07 and I love it here in the hills around my house and commute to work. The CP2 has a ton of torque. It's a fun bike to ride, by the way. I'm thinking of an R9 for sure as a second bike. Dude, you got to do it. Listen, it's a good level up. The beauty of the R9, and I was a bit critical of this bike, admittedly, in the video that I had released. And the only reason why I was is because I'm looking at it from the point of view of somebody who grew up around hypersports middleweights, the R6s, ZX6, any of the middle, my track bike was a GSXR 750. So when I hear middleweight super sport or middleweight sport bike, that is the very first thing that I start to think of. And it's hard to separate that mentality from what the reality is of how people actually ride these motorcycles. For the most part, guys are not out there trying to rip the heads off of their friend. Well, some of us do. Well, look, you shouldn't be doing what I do, so don't even listen to half the stuff I say. But the reality is that most guys just want a fun, sporty motorcycle to go out and have fun. Especially returning guys, you might have had some street squiddly background. Maybe you had a few track days underneath you and you feel good about getting the bike over on the side of the tire. You like to float the front end, stuff like that. I love it. I think it's great. And I think this motorcycle is going to scratch that itch for a ton of guys. And again, if you're buying the motorcycle with the understanding that you're not coming into this transaction looking for a hyper sports experience. Again, the CP3, it's a phenomenal engine for its purpose. And again, yes, it does get a little bit asthmatic at about, it starts to get that way about 8,000, about 78 to 8,000 RPM. It'll still pull, don't get me wrong. But that power curve does start to flatten off. It peaks at about 9,500 RPM. It's a very good engine. And and also, while I'm talking about that engine, keep in mind, it is a CP3. These bikes don't really respond the way that other engines do to tuning, exhaust, and all that stuff. Yes, you can get 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 more horsepower out of it, but don't look for big percentage gains. To get 10% out of that bike would actually be it would actually be a pretty decent achievement. So the CP3, from a tuning and piping standpoint, if you got 10%, you're actually doing better than 90% of anybody else that's out there. But that's not why you're buying that bike. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of my perspective with that bike. I come from a certain age, if you will, and initially was looking at it like, it's not a hyper sports bike. It's going to get its clock cleaned out on the twisties, the canyons. You're going to have GSXR 750s and the V2 Panigales. You're going to have guys on GSX S1000s that are just going to try to rip this thing's head completely apart. But then the more I thought about it is, for the most part, the guys that are just out there having fun, they've got the bike on the side of the tire, they're enjoying themselves, and they're just in it to be out and about and to be doing something. This bike is going to fit their life and their needs perfectly for a sporting motorcycle that is a rich riding experience without being overwhelming. And so will the RCR once it hits. It'll be a different riding experience because it's a parallel twin with a 270-degree firing order. I think personally, I would probably take the character of a triple over the P2. But that's just kind of me. Plus, I'm a little bit of a sucker for triples as it sits. And oh yeah, this is the other thing. So I know that there is a contingency of folks that are out there that are old school Triumph fans that are looking at the R9 as the Daytona that they never got. Like, this is the Daytona that Triumph should have made. I mean, they do have a 900cc triple. They could have done everything that Yamaha did with the CP3 to that engine, and anyway, coulda, shoulda, woulda, right? The fact is that a lot of folks initially might have been looking at this like, okay, I couldn't get a Daytona, but I can get an R9, and that's pretty close. And I got to tell you, horsepower notwithstanding, it's not that far from the bike that you maybe wanted to have Triumph build. It really is kind of the spiritual successor to the Triumph T595. Not necessarily the 595N, the later Daytonas. Those were making about 140 horsepower out of about the same displacement. I don't want to get too in the weeds on that. Again, I don't want to ruin this bike by comparison, because this is another thing about this bike. It's not bred for a racetrack. I know you're going to see a lot of press and you're going to hear guys reviewing this motorcycle, and they're going to be talking about how it did on track and what it compared to, and well, it's not this, but it's certainly that. Here's my take on that. Listen, yes, you'll see it get run on the track because it's got the electronics. It's got everything that you might conceive of as far as cool gizmos and tchotchkes. But really, for the returning rider, that's the safety aspect that I like about it. 6-axis IMU, fully customizable programs that you can put together for this thing. 3 different ride modes. The launch control, which I still find amusing in a 117 horsepower motorcycle. But one other thing that may have already been confirmed also is it's actually got a little bit more aggressive gearing than the MT-09 and the XSR, which I found that to be kind of funny to hear, because typically you would want something, a type of gearing, you'd want that to be having a little bit longer legs. In this case, it might actually be a little bit more rowdy than the hooligan that it's replacing. So it's the sport bike with the heart of a hooligan. How about that? Let's just go with that as an advertising slogan for that motorcycle. But with all of that being said, I guess at the end of the day, I would have to ask myself, am I a player on that particular motorcycle? And I got to tell you, I don't know that I am. Like, I really like my Katana, and I don't know that I would add an R9 to my arsenal just yet. Although I will say this, I'm going to have to reserve my opinion and what I would want to do with that bike until I get a chance to ride one. Because for me, here's the deal. I can't take my T595 on track anymore. And that is the closest to this motorcycle in terms of power and power delivery, the way that it's going to deliver power. It's roughly the same cc's. It makes roughly the same horsepower at roughly the same RPM. So in saying all of that, it would be really cool to have a 900cc triple that I could take to a short track day, have a lot of fun with, and have a bike that you could beat the living hell out of and never have to worry about it, and have it be exceptionally good on street. And if nothing else, it will act as an amazing training aid for somebody that, again, may be getting back into doing track days. I wouldn't say this is an entry-level bike, by the way, by any stretch of the imagination. It certainly is not that. The CP3 is no joke. It makes plenty of power, and with this motorcycle checking in at only, well, heck, it was just shy of 200 kilograms, which is what, 440 pounds? It's not a super lightweight, but I mean, it's making plenty of power for the weight that it is. So for the guys that are looking to buy a bike that can do a little bit of everything, this R9 has a lot going for it, and you can actually make a case that from a value standpoint, it's got a lot going for it. And the reason why I say it like that is this. Look, I know what I have said, and I stand by everything that I've said about this motorcycle versus the hyperclass bikes, especially the GSX-R 750. I know everybody's sick of hearing me say it, but they're really that good, and they are very versatile. But the one thing that they don't do is they don't offer up the rich riding experience that a large displacement triple or parallel twin can offer up. That's that immediate twist of the throttle, and you feel every one of those cylinders hitting, that torque hit that you get that you're just not going to find out of an engine that needs to rev to 10, 12, 14,000 RPM before it really is starting to make hay. And so with this engine having such a broad power band, it's just going to be, again, it'll be fun, it'll be enjoyable, and I think it's going to be one of the neater bikes to hit the scene in a long time. And it is the next step for guys coming off of A2 type bikes. Again, the CBR 650, the Daytona 660, the Tuono 660, bikes like that, there hasn't been a motorcycle to graduate up into. There really hasn't been. And now that they've got the R9, soon to be the RCR, I would love to see if Kawasaki is going to do something with the Z900 power plant. Could they put that in a bit more of maybe a bespoke frame, give it a full fairing, and maybe have a 128 or 132 horsepower 900 four-cylinder versus 128 horsepower P2 versus 120-ish, and that's being polite, CP3? I mean, that would be a neat trio to be able to graduate up into. Plus, they're not hyper sports bikes. And I think that is the thing that initially I did not exactly agree with. I thought that if it's a 900cc bike and it looks like that, this thing has real clip-ons, guys. It doesn't have the the triple clamp style bars. It doesn't have Clubman style bars. It's got legit clip-ons. It's a great bike. So, it's a great bike for folks that want to have a sports bike. It's got clip-ons, but it's not ultra aggressive in its riding position. I'm really looking forward to seeing this thing once it lands. Ryan saying the CF Moto new triple seems right for me. Yeah, that new 675 out of CF is looking pretty good. Also saying the Scout's getting a friend. I like it. I do like that a lot. Let me know how that ends up working out, man. That's cool. I love to hear it. By the way, speaking of CF Moto, if you haven't seen one, they're pretty good. I haven't ridden one yet, but they put a lot of thought into that bike and that brand, I should say. And it's one of the brands that is kind of listening to their fans and to their customers. To have a triple 675, I think it's about 100 horsepower. So it's also right there at the limit of what the A2 compatible, or at least the A2 tunable bikes are. Again, we're talking about the heavy hitters here are the Tuono 660, CBR 650, and the Daytona 660. But there's other bikes in there as well. The R7, here's the funny thing, the R7 is almost turned into the Miata of motorcycles when it comes to track days. You will see so many guys on R7s from all different types of, all different walks of life, all different experience levels, because lightweight motorcycles, in other words, the small class motorcycles, are they're a lot of fun, and people are finding out that it's a competitive race class too. So, I mean, no higher praise can be given for a motorcycle for it to be compared with the likes of the Miata when it comes to seeing these things on track. Southern's asking, what are the specs on 0 to 60 and such on the R9? It's going to fall in lockstep with wherever the MT09 is. So it'll be 0 to 60 in the threes, I'm sure. Provided you can keep the front end down. With all the nannies in play, it's got launch control, so it could potentially be pretty quick. Most bikes like that, and it's all 0 to 60 times are kind of tough on bikes because you've got a lot of wheelie control that you're in the process of doing. So it's motorcycles, unless they're set up for it, they don't 60 foot very well. So if you're looking to try to hammer out an acceleration run, it'll get there pretty quickly, but you're gonna be a busy boy while you're fanning through the gears on those. Skids is in saying, what up, B? You sneaking in alive tonight? Yep, always got the cadence, the ball guy with the flex and the shades. I like it. Yeah, man, we're talking about the R9. Wanted to get my thoughts out there, doing a little bit of a quick show this evening. And, I want to say this. This is the main thing that I like about the R9. As critical as that other video that I made was, it's not a hyper sports bike. The Gixxer 750 is going to, do things. It's going to be, it's not even going to hold a candle to it. Here's where the big difference is. It's going to be a fun bike. It's going to offer up a rich riding experience, and it's not going to be the type of bike that is trying to overwhelm you with the horsepower that it can produce. It kind of stinks, though, that engine doesn't respond as well as others do to tuning and exhaust modifications, airboxes, and stuff like that. But with all of that being said, you don't necessarily need more power. And I know that's rich coming from me, but the reality is that I think that for the guys that are going to be buying this motorcycle, they know what they're buying. And I think that they are going to be pleasantly surprised by the fact that it offers up everything that an MT09 or an XSR 900 or the XSR GP can offer up in terms of a fun riding experience, that it won't break the bank at $12,500, and it'll be fun in all conditions. Torquey for in and around town. Plenty of power to get you into trouble up in the twisties out on your favorite country roads. That's where this motorcycle is going to do its best. And these are going to be the same guys that will watch the guys on Hypersports go around them and just wish them the best. And this bike is really more set up for that type of rider. Guys really more hanging out like good vibes, wants to have something that is confidence inspiring when you're on the side of the tire. But is not, again, trying to feather tires every time he takes the motorcycle out. That's who this motorcycle is for. He's going to leave the Hypersports guys to their own devices, and that's a cool thing. And that would have been me going around like, why is this guy blowing this slow ass? Yeah, I think maybe the guy on the R9 knew a little bit more than I did, and so I get it 100%. Oh, Ryan's hanging out with Skids saying, I'm getting the CF Moto 675. Skids is liking it. The GSXR 750 has gone unchanged now for 20 years. Probably why it gets slept on, right or wrong. You know what the funny thing about that bike is, not to get off too much off subject, but my Katana, which is a K5 GSXR 1000 engine, is basically a GSXR 750 engine with an overbore and a stroker kit. That's it. There's nothing that separates that engine from the GSXR 750 other than that and some more aggressive camshafts. Skid saying, RMAC, dude, don't blame me. Can definitely do some damage from the looks of that thing. Talking about the CF Moto 675. There's a lot of folks that are going to be running that CF Moto 675. I can promise you that. And again, they do a great job. They've got good components. Now, there's folks that are worried about durability, but I don't know, and I don't think that there's going to be anything that's going to be a that would be questionable when it comes to durability with those things. I don't know that anybody has had any real problems with those bikes, and to be quite honest, for what you're spending on the bike, you can have a ball with it. You won't have a lot in it. So if you go to move on to something else and you sell it, you're not going to be out any through depreciation issues. So I think that works out nice. Ryan saying it's a steal of a deal too on that CF Moto. Yep, and it is a triple. Yeah, the 675 is a triple. Southern saying, agreed, Skid. It's like being unchanged for so long. It's like a car not changed for 20 years. Talking about that GSXR 750. Listen, there's a reason why T-bone steaks aren't microwaved, right? There's a reason why, certain foods, certain flavors they're just already perfection, right? So why would you go along changing it? Anyway, I joke, but anyway, the funny thing about the GSXR 750, and I was doing some quick, just kind of playing around with numbers. Even I've there's stuff I had forgotten and wasn't really paying attention to, if I'm being totally honest. But the funny thing about the GSXR 750 is when it was first, well, it's the oldest, it's a legacy motorcycle, right? So when the GSXR 1000 was first released, it was nothing more than it's a GSXR 750 with like a 60 or 90 overbore and a stroker kit. But now it's not like that. Now the GSXR 1000, it's got a 76 cc bore, or 76 millimeter bore, and the GSXR 750 has a 70 millimeter bore. So, lots have changed. But, the interesting thing is, we can talk about it like that, but that CP3, that's been around for a long time, and it's been around for a long time for a real good reason. It just happens to work. It's really good at delivering power everywhere. And again, this is a big part of it, I think, for a lot of folks. Larger displacement, lower revving, fewer cylinder engines are going to develop that under the throttle, that, in other words, that partial throttle hit of torque. It's going to be a much richer riding experience in that condition. And I think for a lot of folks, again, that's what's going to attract them to these types of motorcycles. And I'll put it to you like this, guys, the hypersports class of bikes has not been selling, at least globally, very well for the better part of a decade and a half. And manufacturers had to do something. And again, they found that when they would enter into focus groups and discuss with riders what their wants or what they could, it's like what if scenarios would come into play, it was never, we wish this motorcycle would spin to 20,000 RPM talking about a 600. Nobody was looking for that. The guys that they would start to talk to, these returning motorcyclists, they had grown up with hypersports bikes, and they just simply were not a player anymore with that type of a machine. They wanted something that was torquier, something that they didn't have to spin to the moon, something that wasn't going to blow their eardrums out when they're riding it. There's a lot that comes into play, especially after you've already been there and done it. Like most of the guys that are going to be buying an R9 are bored with hypersports motorcycles. Not to say that you could ever get bored with a hypersports bike, but they're bored with the nonsense that comes with it. The high-strung nature, all of that. So that's a lot of who's going to be buying this motorcycle too. DM saying, hit the like button. Skid sounds like a little company named Harley Davidson. Yeah, they haven't changed much. Oh, hey, speaking of Harley Davidson, what the hell is up with, what's the name of the company? A Chinese company that is building Sportster engines and Sportsters basically in license. They're basically licensed Harley Davidson Sportsters, 1200 Sportsters. Yeah, who is that? It starts with an S, I think. Anyway, y'all know who y'all probably know better than that. Anyway, I stumbled across that when I was doing some research on some other bikes today. Ryan said, I remember when the Evo motor was brand new. I like the Evo bikes, dude. I'm not kidding. Right, Skid saying right, for sure. Oh, the Evo 111. You remember the Evo 104? One of my neighbors had an Evo 104. One of the earliest bagger guys that I had ever known, too. This is Skid saying a pipe, an intake, and a tune. Yeah. Benelli, no, this is a different one, man. This is, who is the Chinese company? I don't have my other phone or I'd look it up. Chinese company building Harley Davidson Evo motors. I don't know. Ran across it. I didn't have time to really go back and check it. I ended up getting a call I had to take. But Preston saying it's insane the hate the R9 is getting from squids or kids that don't even ride. Isn't that the truth? The CP3 motor and a sport bike will be a dream. I had a 2023 MT-09 and after the ECU Flash, it was a blast to ride. And see, this is the thing I've been trying to tell folks. I know that I've been critical in my first video. I was critical of the R9 only because I was hoping that it was going to be something that it couldn't be. And the something that it couldn't be is a hyper sports motorcycle. People don't want a hyper sports bike. They want a sports bike. And they want something that's going to be durable, something that is going to be comfortable to get on the side of the tire, but not overwhelming when it comes to horsepower. It will be a riot to ride. And although the power number will be basically unaffected once you tune it and pipe it, you can remove nannies. And this is something else. What a lot of folks don't realize is when you're tuning motorcycles, when you pick up power, a lot of times, more often than not, it's the nannies being removed that make you pick up power, not the pipe, not the exhaust, not any of that stuff, especially at lower RPM, where most bikes have their heaviest nannies because they're trying to keep the front end on the ground. So yes, it's going to be a ball to ride. Plus, it's got a little bit more aggressive gearing than the MT-09 with the same gearbox. Is my understanding. It's got the same gear ratios first through sixth, but it's a little bit more aggressive on the pinion. No, it's on the. It's on both gears, I think. Now that I'm thinking about it. Anyway, one way or another, I think the rear sprocket's got one or two more teeth to it. Either way, it's a more aggressive gearing with this thing. It's going to be a good running bike. And again, the frame itself is bespoke to the R9. This is not an MT-09 or an XSR 900 with a rebody. It does have some things that have been done to it to make it its own motorcycle, which is very good for sure. Skid saying the MT-09 SP is what you buy with a CP3. Probably the best do-it-all bike being built right now. Ryan's liking the R9 sexy as hell too. I'm telling you guys, this is no joke. Everybody that I've talked to, and I don't know of one person that has ever come back from a ride on an MT-09 XSR 900. Overseas, you've got the XSR 900 GP. Look, you cannot argue with every single one of the reviews that comes back being positive. I mean, that has to speak volumes, right? That has to say something about that bike. Preston saying my MT-09 would effortlessly power wheelie in second. Yeah, they do. Sometimes in third if I was leaning back too far. Granted, I like my MT-10 SP much more. That CP3 was a sweet little engine. Sounds like a wave runner. Yeah, it does. It kind of, I'll just, hang on a second. Earthquake, timeout. There we go. Whoa. But yeah, that's where the CP3 does its best work. It's just being a fun motorcycle to ride, and I can't. Again, it's okay to have something that's fun. You don't have to have warp drive engaged all the time to have an enjoyable motorcycle. And I can bore you to tears with stories about the Bonneville, the Daytona, the Katana. These are bikes that I ride as often as I possibly can. Although the T595, at some point it's just going to have to be like shop art, right? Because it's harder to get parts for. The bike runs great once it fires up. It runs amazingly well. It does need a clutch. And I did fix the handlebar because it was... Anyway, if you didn't see that video, check it out. That was kind of scary when that thing decided to not be affixed to the motorcycle properly anymore while I was leaned over going through a right-hand sweeper. Anyway, getting back to it, the reality is that this R9 is going to be a lot of fun. I will be a liar, though, if I were to say that I am overwhelmed with joy about the state of tune that the CP3 is in. The reason why I say that is this. The only place that I'm critical of that bike is that it does not make 130 horsepower. I think that 130 was the magic number, and the RCR almost gets there. Let's just go ahead and give it credit for 130. If you're at 128, you're at 130. And that's where that engine is going to fall. And it's a parallel twin. I would like to have seen, if a parallel twin can get to 128 at 950-ish cc's, then a triple should be able to get to 128 or 130 at 900 cc's. And I think that would have been right. Maybe a bump up in compression. Kind of do what Kawasaki does with their 948s. You have the RS variant, and then you have the Z900 variant, and there's a distinct difference in power output between the two. About 128 to 130 something horsepower, somewhere in the upper part of 120-ish horsepower. That's kind of what I was looking for. With tuning in a pipe, maybe you get it there, or at least you get it close. Again, I know the CP3 doesn't take to tuning, at least in terms of putting down power numbers, like other bikes do. But that being said, it's not like it's a zero gain. You do still get something for your efforts. So in saying that, time will tell. I am looking forward to getting my leg over that motorcycle. If from all accounts, riding position is going to be practically perfect. And I do believe, as weird as it is for me to admit, I don't want it, maybe it's Stockholm Syndrome or something like that, but I really am starting to warm up to the idea of the new graduated class of motorcycles, where you have the A2 style bikes that sub 100 horsepower, like the Tuono 660, CBR 650, you know the guys, right? And then you get into the super middleweights, where all of these bikes presumably will be around 900 cc's. All of them will be around 130-ish horsepower, 120, 130. Okay, I get it. And I think that is going to be the new standard for sporting, fun, enjoyable motorcycles. It's not to say that hyper sport bikes don't have their place. There's always going to be guys that want that 600cc screamer that rips to 15,000 RPM. And then they'll graduate from that to either a Gixxer 750 or a leader class bike. I get it. We're out there. I'm kind of one of them, only because I grew up in that era, though. But for the more sensible of us, those of us that aren't knuckleheads will be gravitating to the bikes like the R9 and the RCR, and will be happier and far less stressed out probably for their efforts. This kid saying, dude, why are you showboating up in here? Talking about Preston. That's funny. Dude, MT10's a good bike. This kid saying, with me having the Duck SS 950, I'm not a player for the R9, but I really think it's a killer bike in white and red. It does look good in that white and red, doesn't it? Skid saying, agreed, need to be at the top of the CP3 family of horsepower, should have hit 130. And the thing is, it wouldn't have taken that much. Quite honestly, a thinner head gasket and a little bit more sauce on the cams could have gotten it there. It really would not have taken very much to get it over the top. And just a bump in compression would have been the big pusher, I think, of getting that extra power out of there. Because, I mean, one extra point would have actually made enough of a difference to at least press it over into that, 121, 122 horsepower range. Preston's saying it's too bad they couldn't have changed timing or cams to have more top end, but that CP3 engine has so much low end torque. There is a video of a guy clutch up wheelie in 6 at 65 miles an hour. It's insane. Yeah, and they're aggressively geared too. There's nothing wrong with the CP3. And I think as guys are becoming more used to the idea of having an engine in a motorcycle like that, I think that it's going to be it's going to be more prevalent. So Skids has got the 950 SS? Yeah, the SS 950. Awesome bike. It's a street sport motorcycle, and it fits in line kind of with what we're talking about here. Again, great for the street, a little bit more, more of an upright type of a bike now, but it doesn't really matter. These guys, I'm telling you, the numbers are in. The year-over-year numbers for the last decade and a half have shown a steady decline in those hypersports class bikes, and really the R9 is it's an answer to the question of where'd the money go. The money went to bikes like that. But at any rate, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. We're coming up on just the other side of 45 minutes. Let me check in with you guys, and then I'm going to get out of here. David is in. Got the bald guy with the shades. I like it. Skid said, I'd love to go from GSX-R 750 to R9 and back to see how different they really are. I tell you what, the R9 will get out on the 750, and then after the 750 figures out that there's actually a race going on, it will be all over for the R9 in terms of straight line speed. Skids, yeah, the SS 950. Basically, the SS 950 is checking in with very similar power numbers to the CP3. So, Skids, you basically have an R9 sitting in your garage right now. It's just an L twin. But anyway, guys, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Listen, appreciate every single one of y'all getting on. I know it's kind of an odd one, but I'm probably going to start doing more Moto chat, Moto chat live shows to go along with the Motor chat or Mopar chat. I'm going to be moving away a little bit from the car stuff and diving a little bit more into the motorcycle side of things. So don't be surprised if you start to see less and less of the car lives and seeing more and more of Moto chat. So with that, guys, as always, get out there and do something cool for somebody. Chances are they need it way more than you know. And with that, we will catch y'all on the next one. That's a wrap.